talk about tonight is a book I wrote about 1.5 years ago. And I have talked about this before. It's called I'm terrible at titles. Georgetown at the Turn of the Millennium. That's because my first book was called Teaching at the Turn of the Century. I'd already said century once, so I went with millennium. Because it was a big deal. Y2K, Y2K1, I don't care which one is real, I know it's Y2K1.
It's been about a year.
I like numbers. So I used that for my title. But there's a particular reason I decided to talk about this one again tonight, because one of the articles in this, and if you have this book, you know that it's a collection of articles I used to write for the Georgetown Record. And one of the articles that I wrote was about elders, and we're going to kind of focus on elders tonight. So I'm going to read this article to you. It's not very long. It's just a newspaper column long. You may not see them. They sit behind their old windows, watching their quiet neighborhoods, listening long to the clock's tick-tock, hoping their telephone might ring, their doorbell might chime, might announce a welcome visitor, remembering favorite stories, forgotten names, planning a wonderful retelling, lacking only a listener, an audience, a little company. Our town has a growing population of experienced citizens. People who can share their hard-earned wisdom, can share a sense of calm and confidence with today's hurried and harried generations. They have watched so much of history. They have lived fully every bit of it, gaining skills and knowledge through each changing decade, learning love, acceptance, and courage through all of their trials and triumphs. Their calm and their confidence has grown with them, gaining strength with each pressing decade. Their perspectives have broadened more than one can imagine. We have among us survivors of 2 world wars, the fearful Cold War, several international conflicts, the Great Depression, the repeating recessions, the rationing of the 40s through the booming 50s, and the erratic 60s. They are the great-grandparents who were children in their 20s and 30s, and then raised their own then raised their own large families, guiding their children, their grandchildren, those generations who ate white bread and bought penny candy and grew round and visited the dentist occasionally. Their great-grandchildren today eat wheat bread. They chew sugar-free gum. They have coaches and trainers, and they stay thinner, but they visit the dentist and the orthodontist. Not much can surprise them. They have truly seen it all. They have watched the main streets widen, harden, fill with traffic, debated and agreed to install traffic lights, allowed their children to cross safely when the red and yellow lights were lit, watched Logan Airport, Cape Canaveral develop, watched computers begin large and expensive, and then grow smaller, cheaper, and more powerful, watched trains move underground and then back out again, watched the cities fill in times of plenty and then empty when times were hard. They learned to read and do sums, or they left school, and in a world where a non-reader could still have a career and support a family. They wrote letters in beautiful penmanship, sharing thoughtful, well-planned messages, and they waited patiently for carefully crafted responses. They often worked all their lives for one company, but now in their telephone diaries, they watch their families' work addresses change before the decade does. Some of our elders have lived in town all of their lives, but many came as young adults, moving to start a new generation away from the cities. The 2 ponds in town attracted summer visitors, and in time, those summer camps became year-round homes. One was a summer community, the Lake Shores Improvement Association. They built a clubhouse for their neighborhood gatherings, and in their day, the city neighborhoods were as familiar, safe, and friendly as our town streets are today. They knew how to protect that safe environment. They gathered on stoops and shared stories and wisdoms in the evenings, and they knew each other's children and families, and many of their children were the citizens who winterized those camps and lived year-round, raising a new generation among their own friends. Here now, Elders want to know their time workers, to know the children. They want to help our gardens grow, and our children grow, and our families grow. They can predict which plants will thrive in our landscape. They learned by doing, year after year, and which will fail, but be replaced with others. They are our town's most precious, valuable resource, often untapped, unrecognized, forgotten. They want to share their time with us. They still have much more than time to share. This winter brought very little required exercise for most of us. I wrote this book in 1999, I think I wrote this book.
We're there again.
With not much snow to shovel, little ice to sand, fewer fallen branches to cut and gather for the woodpile, but still families have been busy, rushing around, doing as much as possible for the children of our town. And soon the gardens will be planted, then kept. But as our days again grow longer, we have a bit more to do. We have visits to make, phones to call, notes to write. They are here. They enrich our neighborhoods, our community, our lives. We can't waste any more time. We have so much to gain from the elders, and so very much to lose. Yes, they still have things to tell us. And so I wrote that because I'm going to talk about Henry and Helen tonight. But before I do, I came up with a sequel to my original book, which is a memoir, but most of you read and called it a love story of Rick. This is its sequel. A lot of people on Facebook asked me to write a sequel. They wanted to know what happened after the end of this book. After I discarded the diagnosis of multiple sclerosis, I rejected the prescription of the pharmacological cure for it, and I went with a more natural approach to it, and how my life has turned out since then. And it's been, as Lynn would call it, a very interesting journey. So I wrote the sequel to talk about that. And what happened was, the title of the sequel is Multiple Sclerosis, Melanoma, and More. While I was down in Bethesda, Maryland, being part of a Parkinson's research clinical study, because both of my parents had Parkinson's disease. And a doctor down there, Dr. Goldstein, was recruiting people who had Parkinson's in their family, people who did not have Parkinson's in their family, people who expected to have Parkinson's but didn't have it yet. That was me. My argument with the neurologist when he was diagnosing me with multiple sclerosis was, I never heard that nobody in my family has it, and I think this is Parkinson's. Well, as it turned out, by going through the study, it is not Parkinson's, they say, yet. They don't know what's ahead. But I was helpful to them in terms of being a normal control person through their study, and I said, wow, I haven't been considered normal in a long time. This is a good thing. So that was really exciting for me. But while I was there on one of my visits, the nurse practitioner that worked with me, who was a lieutenant corporal in the United States Navy, she was a striking, beautiful black woman, probably 30, 35 years old, a nurse practitioner and a lieutenant corporal in the Navy. I was blown away to have someone like that sitting in an office and talking with me. I felt so privileged to have her take an interest in my health. And she was fabulous. And she took an interest in me as a whole person. And she wanted to know any concerns that I had. And she wanted to know what that spot was on my leg that was kind of looked crusty and a little bit bloody. And so I told her I'd had that for a while, and I thought that it had been like a hornet bite that got infected and hadn't gone away, and I'd had it for about a year. So she said that her second love was dermatology, and that I should get me to a dermatologist as soon as I got home. And so I did. And I went to a dermatologist. I had to wait a month for the appointment because they're very overbooked. A lot of people are really looking at their skin conditions now, which is good, positive. And I got to see him, and he's in Brighton, and he said to me, I see some spots that I want to biopsy. And I said, okay, well, the nurse practitioner in Bethesda said she was concerned and thought there should be biopsy. And when he biopsied, they came back on one site on my back as being malignant melanoma. The site on my leg, which I had been concerned about, was basal cell carcinoma. And I found out in a later visit that a site on my other leg was squamous cell cancer. So I have won the jackpot, as he said. I have all three skin cancers, and he said that's not very typical. I think it's a 7% of the population that would have all three. And he said, but it can be treated. It can only be treated surgically, so I want you to go to see a surgeon. I didn't know that. I thought dermatologists were their own surgeons. They're not. They do the diagnosing. They send you to a surgeon to do the treatment. So I went to a surgeon, and I'll read you that section of the book. Meet the surgeon. That Monday, we left the house at 5:30 a.m. I saw the surgeon, Dr. Walker, as his first patient of the day. Promptly at 7 a.m., he explained that he would take a small excision of tissue, removing enough but not too much, and send the tissues out for biopsy. The two basal carcinoma sites could be biopsied right there in the office. There was one on my shoulder and one on my leg. The other one was my back. They could be done right in the office, but the malignant melanoma would have to culture overnight. So he would do the melanoma first, and the basal could wait until the melanoma had been addressed. I agreed, and he began to cut for the melanoma. Unfortunately, biopsy was confusingly misreported, and it led him to believe that the site that was melanoma was on my shoulder, which actually was basal. He showed me the report afterward, and I agreed that it had misled him to my right back, which he assumed was my right shoulder, which was irritated and nasty looking. When he realized the report's error, he read the results of that shoulder's tissue as basal cell carcinoma, and he was satisfied that it was now clear, and so he sutured it. He then cut into the tissue at my left back, which did not look as serious. It simply had a flat red marking like a simple sunburn. Nothing was raised, nothing was scabbing. He sent that tissue out for culturing. He apologized profusely for the confusion, assuring me that the shoulder would heal with only a small white scar. We joked about his black suture stitches, and I told him I was a quilter, and he would probably not use black on such, I would probably not use black on such a pale fabric as my skin. He said he would have to take special care to align his stitches neatly on me. His assistant covered the small open wound on my back with a dressing, and they sent me home with a precautionary prescription for an antibiotic as the wound was left open. So he didn't suture this because it was melanoma. I had one set of directions for caring for the shoulder sutures, and I was told to do nothing with the open wound, as I would be back in the office in 2 days. Rick drove us home, and as I talked with him about the surgery, I was sitting up on a raised bed, recliner, I guess, and it looked like it would go back down in the back. But Dr. Walker's assistant, Philippe, he did angle that away a little bit so that he could work on my back. But I never thought I would have skin surgery sitting up. But the doctor seemed comfortable working that way, and Philippe covered my shoulder with steri pads and bandages, and that's where the stitches would be. And I'm not sure that my skin won't react to those bandages like my dad's used to. And I have care directions for both of the sites, and I have a prescription to pick up for an antibiotic, and I wish he had let you come in with me. It's okay, Rick responded, when I finally stopped the tumbling stream of words to take a breath. We can look at the papers when we get home. We'll stop at CVS, pick up the prescription. And he kept his eyes on the city traffic as our OnStar navigator guided him through the city streets. That went on for almost a week. The wound was left open for almost a week. It was a week because I went back the next Monday and finally had clear margins on that very meticulous surgery. He took as little as he could take each time and checked for more melanoma sites or cells. And when it was finally clear, he could suture it up. But it was quite large by the time he finished, and he stitched it up with his black stitches in the shape of a Z. because he had cut a small hole the first time, and the next time he went in to try to get clear margins, and the hole got bigger. And the hole was about this big by the time he finished it. And so to close a hole on your skin, if you're not getting a skin graft, I had plenty of skin. Yeah. If you remember reading this book, I had lost 50 pounds in this book. So I had plenty of skin. So what he did was he had Philippe take his big, massive hands and smoosh this together and literally sewed it together as a Z. So I call it my mark of Zorro. I never have to have a tattoo. I have an original. It's mine. So the melanoma was treated, but it came back. And it came back on my arm. It was a totally different site. And so they call that a recurrent malignant melanoma, which put me on a 3-month schedule of seeing the dermatologist. And the dermatologist checks each time. If he finds a basal, or he finds a squamous, or he finds a melanoma, he'll send me back to the surgeon to have it excised or removed. And so I've been doing that now for 2 years, and I've had maybe 12 biopsies and I think 8 surgeries in all. And I will do that for the rest of my life until he reaches a point where I go a full year without any surgery needed. Then he will tell me it's no longer recurrent, and then I can go to like a 6-month checkup schedule. So all of that is talked about in this book. And I do give some resources through the book as to sites and websites that you can go to collect more information. But this is something that also ties into being in my 60s. As we get older, things show up. Things that we, I don't want to say contracted because it's not contagious, but things that we made possible in our childhood. And as a child living in South Boston with the Atlantic Ocean right at the foot of my street practically, we were on the beach every day. And there was no wonderful SPF 30 in the 1950s. They had sunblock, but it was to attract the sun. They had baby oil with iodine, and it was to attract the sun. They had aluminum foil so that you could get all that burn right down onto your neck so you could attract the sun and have a beautiful tan. I never tanned. I burned, peeled, and freckled. That was it. That's all I did. And now I have melanoma. But, and this goes back to the first book, there's a part of me that believes that the reason melanoma bloomed when it did was because for 4 years I took those injections for multiple sclerosis, whose purpose it was to weaken my immune system. And with a weakened immune system, cancer cells have a field day in the body. So that melanoma has probably been there since childhood, but it was dormant. It wasn't acting out, it wasn't blooming, it wasn't spreading. It hasn't spread. I'm very fortunate it has not metastasized, is the word they use, when melanoma spreads, usually to a liver, brain, or some other significant organ.
Terry, why did they take a small
There's a doctor in Boston, and his name is Dr. Moe, M-O-H. He's Oriental. He is Oriental. And it's called Moe surgery. And they try to be very conservative. They try to take as little skin tissue as they can, so they're not interrupting the normal cell growth of healthy cells. And so by scraping and shaving, it's really shaving that they do, they read the biopsies, and the biopsies come back, and they make a map as they send the tissue out. And the biopsies come back, and it says, in the 4th quadrant, which is usually the, I don't know, they read it as up, I read it as down, because he's looking up and I'm looking down. But they identify where there is still a malignant cell seen. What they can't guarantee is that they get all of the cells, because it's cellular, it's minute, it's microscopic. They do the best they can, and the more they get, the less can grow. There is chemotherapy that they can use. I wouldn't go for it. I'm not in favor of chemotherapy, because chemotherapy damages as many or more healthy cells as it does cancer cells. And so I'm a coward in that sense. I wouldn't play that. I wouldn't roll the dice with that at all. And yet I know people who have had chemotherapy and have had success with it. And I congratulate their courage in allowing doctors to do that. I'm not very liberal in that sense, I guess. But it's something that at some point, if this continued to bloom and bloom and bloom, then I would have to consider it, or just continue to have ongoing surgeries. And that's something that older people have to think about, and so we do. Which brings me to my current book. So this is called Quilter's Quarters, and it's Quilter's singular, because this is really about Helen's quilt shop. And Helen is a character that was in my head, and, excuse me, until I went to the Boston Christmas Festival. And Rick and I go each year, and we have a wonderful time walking around looking at all of the crafters who are there. And we came upon these two dolls. And I said to Rick, oh my God, that's Helen and Henry. That's who I'm writing about. And we walked over and we talked to the woman who made the dolls. They are ceramic. I mean, their shoes, their socks. Forgive me, Helen. Helen's rolled up stockings at the end of the day. They're very appropriate for aged dolls. And so I have Helen and Henry with me in my quilt shop. This book is really a projection of where I see Rick and I in about 15 years when we're in our 80s. And so I named Helen after my Aunt Helen, who was very good to me. And I named Henry after Rick's Uncle Henry, who lived next door to Rick for a while and was good to him. Helen and Henry had met in real life, but they would have been a fantastic pair if they had. They were both happily married to other people who had nothing to do with my story. So Helen has a quilt shop, and this is something that I wanted to do for a long time and didn't know that I wanted to do. It was kind of a daydream. I like to quilt. I wish I could buy fabric inexpensively. If I had my own shop, I could. I could set prices. I could get fabric from a warehouse. And now I can. I do. When I retired at the end of this book, I wouldn't have given 2 cents for me. I was done. I felt I was used up. I was disappointed in myself. I was disappointed in the medication that I had allowed myself to be talked into. I felt it has done much more harm. No good at all. I have been diagnosed with relapsing remitting multiple sclerosis. I don't relapse. I don't have symptoms that come, devastate me, and then miraculously go away. I don't live that life. I feel for people who really do have that. And I understand why they continue to reach for the pharmacological cure for that, or at least treatment for that. But the injection that I was taking for that said nothing about alleviating symptoms. And the symptoms that people who relapse have might be, they might wake up blind one day. They might wake up without any hearing one day. They might wake up having lost anything that their central nervous system has to do with. It can be anything. I lived with that fear for 4 years. I believed that diagnosis for 4 years. It devastated me. It wiped me out in terms of confidence. You can't be a teacher if you're not confident. It wiped me out in terms of organization and my ability to listen to 25 channels at once, which is what a classroom teacher has to do. I couldn't concentrate on my kids. I couldn't remember their names. I couldn't write progress reports on kids if I was going to mix them up. And so I had to retire. And I was truly devastated. I had spent my life becoming a teacher. I taught well for 30 years. Well, 28. The last 2 years, I tried my hardest. But I know I wasn't as good as I was for the first 28. I know I wasn't. And I worked with wonderful people who helped me cope and manage. But I wasn't me. And MS, the diagnosis of MS and the treatment for MS was painful. It was humiliating. I had to inject in 7 different body sites through the 7 days of the week. Rick had to help me with some of them because I couldn't reach them physically. It undid me, and I finally stopped. I said, I've had it. I have to retire. This was supposed to slow the progression of MS. It's made it worse. Why am I still taking this? It's even worse. I've lost my career. This is why I took this medication. I thought it would help me reach the magic 32 years. That's when a teacher can retire saying, I nailed it. And I almost nailed it. But I didn't nail it. And the medication became the target for my anger. And so I stopped taking it. And I went natural. I went through a better menu. I don't call it a diet because diets are so temporary and people yo-yo on diet. I call it a menu change. And I am healthier for it. I'm stronger for it. And I am so much happier for it because I kind of did this to the medication. I'm doing fine without it. And I've regained a lot of the confidence that I had to the point where in my mid-60s, I have opened my own quilt shop. And so I wrote another book because that's what I do. So here's my book. And it's about Helen and Henry. And Helen and Henry are now 81 years old. They've been married for 61 years. They have a couple of kids. They don't play much of a role in the first two books, but they will emerge as the series of books go on. So I'll read you a little bit of Helen. The quilt shop had been an idle thought for many years, as many years as had lapsed since the closure of the 5 and 10 downtown. Once, people could find last-minute supplies for their knitting and sewing projects in the store that was known for having just about everything. When it closed its doors, people found that they would have to travel to a mall or find another small town and another shop there for their essentials. Running a small business in competition with large chain stores was becoming harder and harder in a weakened economy. Running a quilt shop was no guarantee of an income either. But this man and his wife were retired, with a pension, with a home nearly paid for. It was a good time to begin building that inventory. It would take either time or borrowed money. Neither of them wanted to borrow any more than they could quickly pay back. It was a mindset they had inherited from their parents. It was the old American dream, the one in which a couple worked hard, raised their kids, sent them to college, paid their bills, and then retired, snug in their home. It was a dream that they held to dearly and planned to fulfill. Rather than traveling all around the country as they once thought they might, they would instead stay home and invite the country to visit their shop. Wouldn't it be lovely, the wife often thought to herself, to be able to retire before health began to decline? To be able to enjoy the freedom of her own schedule, uncluttered by doctor's appointments. They say youth is wasted on the young, but perhaps they have that wrong. Perhaps retirement is wasted on elders. It seems backwards to pension off the people who have patiently gathered enough knowledge and skill to do most jobs well. Retirement, as portrayed in the media, almost demands a healthy, vigorous strength and organized yet flexible spontaneity that would accommodate sudden vacation opportunities, sentimental anniversary surprises. How naive to think that travel plans could be realized in later years and put them off. At a quilt shop, it is something that the townspeople will want to visit, will find it easy to get to, local, dependable in providing what needleworkers of all sorts need. The shop will have a regular schedule, some daylight, some early evenings to accommodate those who hold jobs out of town. Just 10 steps door to door for the two of us. No need to drive on icy roads. No worry about grading children or training new workers. Each of us will be able to work at our own pace, to our own standards, and with people that we will enjoy seeing. Yep, the wife thought, this is the right path for this leg of life's journey. To be safe and productive, to be together, to be home happily ever after. She went to the barn, and she was surprised to find a person standing on the other side of the open door. That's the beginning of Helen's mystery in the shop. A little bit about Henry. The front of the barn was still an original building, and they estimated it to be at least 100 years old, and perhaps older. The dark beams were exposed along the ceiling, supporting the second floor that was still primarily being used as what the man's mother would call a hidey hole. Their plan was to empty the forgotten clutter out and brighten the space with a new wallboard and create a quilting classroom, but it would have to wait a while longer. Right now, they're in transition. What had once been the wooden toy and gift shop was now diversifying into the wooden toy and gift shop and thoughts and threads. The wooden trucks and Christmas ornaments and the holiday carousels now shared space with his wife's quilts and her growing collection of self-published books. And soon, bolts of fabric and shelves of sewing notions would take more space from each of those. Everyone who saw the wooden toys that the man made admired them, and many would strike up a conversation about how kids' toys today were all made of plastic, and they took batteries, and they're too complicated electronically to fix them when they broke. Yep, everyone saw the value of making wooden toys safely, right here in the USA, rather than importing them cheaply from foreign markets. Yes, 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 they would say, and they would walk away, smiling at the conversation and memories, but shy of the price of good wood and honest labor. Toys were more an impulse item for most adults, bought quickly, in a mad dash through the mall, chosen by a brand name or a low price. The wooden toy maker was a nice person, but his prices were higher in China. So the quilt shop will ideally invite more people, a different clientele than just parents of young children, going to reach towards another generation and invite people in. And those people will come in and they will see what the woodworker has in his product shop. And hopefully the business will continue to grow as it goes. So Helen and Henry. Helen is a dear soul. She has some health issues. They probably won't come out until about the third book. In the second book that I'm working on right now, a new little character is going to appear. And she's sitting in a rocking chair near Helen. This is the next book that's coming out. A Winter Wonder in the Quilter's Quarters. Somebody is in shock. And they're not squatters. They're not fairies or leprechauns, although they certainly act like them, and they know all of the leprechaun and fairy stories. But they're there, and they're trying to earn their keep there. And so that story is going to develop about this little girl who cherishes her doll and brings her everywhere. Helen and Henry haven't met the little girl yet. They meet her near the end of the second book when they find out what she's been doing in the shop. And they take her out together. So that's the group of characters in the series. Do you have any questions you'd like to ask? No?
Going back to your biopsies, and the one was on the back, you said you left it open.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Did you put your blouse over it, or did you?
No, it was covered with bandages, but it wasn't sutured. It wasn't stitched up. It was open in physical sense.
I thought it was open.
Not exposed.
Okay.
No, in fact, that was why I worried about the bandages. My dad had an allergy to adhesives, and we thought it was because he was in fire. He was a fire chief in Boston, and he was in a factory fire that dealt with many adhesives in making carpet and furniture, and he was exposed to those burning gases, and as a result, he was always sensitive to any adhesives, and his skin would become really raw if he had a bandage on for more than, I'd say, 45 seconds. It would pop out that fast, and if it stayed there, it would become raw and uncomfortable. And I've had some issues with bandages, and so I'm careful of that. I'm maybe even a little paranoid. But that's probably self-protective in its own right. And so that's why I worry about that. So they do cover them with bandages. The weekend between the first Monday and the second Monday, when it was finally completed, I actually ended up in the hospital because I had had a twist in my back. Somehow I turned wrong and I was getting out of bed that morning. And it just pulled a muscle or something in my back. And I went in, and because I was there, the nurse took a look at this because we knew that he had to change. I couldn't touch it for 24 hours. Then he had to clean the open wound. We were going on 6 days at that point. He'd been doing it each night since the second night. And she said, "Oh, I'll do that with you." And so they both did the wound care together. So he's become quite a skilled health coordinator,
Home nurse.
a home health aide.
Well, it's gonna need to
he's
be because
everything.
they're losing their jobs.
I know. But we both have learned so much medical information in going through the MS, the neurology, all of the testings, and the pharmacology. I did finally write a letter to the FDA and express my concern about these medications that they have now proven through 10-year studies are totally ineffective in terms of delaying the progression of multiple sclerosis. They've admitted that they do nothing. And they never claimed to treat any symptoms. The symptoms can be treated with other medications, but not with these particular injections. They were only supposed to slow the progression, and they don't.
Terry, everything's intertwined in the things that you've written. Is that deliberate? Did you set out when you moved to the fiction rather than the non-fiction to intertwine the things you've written previously?
The elderly piece of it is a reflection of my thoughts following retirement. What do I do with the rest of my life? I wanted so long to be a teacher. I was 33 before I was a classroom teacher. I had a lot of other jobs in the meantime, but it took me that long to get a position. And I absolutely loved it. I loved teaching. I loved the kids. I loved the material. I had what they called the golden ticket. I had a K-8 certification, which they don't offer anymore in Massachusetts. I also had a special education nursery through 9th grade certification, which took a lot of work to get it, but I got it. I got a master's degree. I never in my wildest dreams expected to go to graduate school. And my first boss in a public school system said to me, "Get your master's degree. I'll help you find a program that's half price off campus." And she did. And that's how I straightened out the special ed certification piece of it. And then I became many things in the school system. I loved it. I did everything I could do, everything I was trained to do. And I learned something new at every single step of the way. It was the most exhilarating environment to work in. The kids were something new every day. My colleagues were something new every day. They all had so much to offer the world, and it made me feel so competent and so productive. And that was a really good feeling. And that's what I lost when I agreed with a doctor that I basically disagreed with, disbelieved in. When I allowed myself to agree to go with this treatment, I let myself down, and that bothered me, and it made things worse. And when I stopped and I walked away from it, I became me again. So I had to figure out, now what can I do? Okay, I'm 60. I do have something. If it's not relapsing remitting MS, and they say it's not Parkinson's. Again, I don't know what it is, but I have something. I have a tremor. My handwriting is getting worse. I have a poor memory for names, particularly names. When they do their testing, they look at MRIs. You have lesions, you have black holes where lesions used to be. I just equate myself with Stephen Hawking. When they tell me that, I think, oh, well, okay, he understands what black holes are. And now I'm mixing metaphors, but so I decided I would focus on elderly characters in this book, and I would project it to be that they would behave the way I would hope Rick and I would be able to behave when we reach that point.
So one did inform the other.
Yeah.
Terry, you said that the quilts, or the stories of the quilts, are part of the books.
They will
You
be.
tell the story of any of these quilts here?
I do. In this book,
Yeah.
I do
Read a
tell the
little
story.
bit?
Do you want me to read one of them?
Read a little bit.
Okay. I'll read, I made a quilt called The 9 of Us. There were 9 children in my parents' family, and I am the 5th. I have a sister born in 41, a brother born in 42, another sister born in 44, another brother born in 45. I was born in 1950, only 2 months into 1950. Had I been born 2 months earlier, I would clearly have been part of the 40s. But no, I'm part of the 50s. I had a sister born in 53, 52, a sister born in 55, another sister born in 58, the one you know,
Yes.
and a little brother born in 59. They all grew up here in Georgetown. I grew up in South Boston. I went to parochial school with the sisters. We all went to public school. I consider myself part of the older half of my family. The older half of my family is diminishing rapidly now. I've lost 3 siblings. I still have a sister, Marilyn, who's quite healthy, well, and me. I call myself Marilyn's here. And my younger sisters and brothers who grew up in a time where Massachusetts allowed 18-year-olds to go to bars. I couldn't do that. I was with the nuns. Well, not when I was 18, but they were still there. So I considered myself part of the older part. So here's the story of the 9 of us in quilt language. And actually that quilt is over here under the books about multiple sclerosis. We were 9, like a set of stairs. Spread over 2 decades, we were born, from the oldest sister Kay, who fed the birds as often as we did, to the youngest brother Jack, and when I say we, I mean Rick and I, who loves to play golf with his family. We all grew in different directions and took on different personalities. I made this quilt during the 9 days before school began, a block a day. The quilt, like every quilt, has a story and an identity. My sister Betty was able to figure out the story of this quilt, and my daughter's friend had a clue of which house was mine, given the snow and Trish's house in Maine. Betty thought the quilt story ought to be told, and so it is here. The coolest place on Scorcher in August is in Rick's barn, and that's where I plan to spend the last days of summer vacation. We had sorted and dusted and swept and cleared the front of the barn to create our craft shop, our place to show and perhaps sell wooden toys and gifts. Few customers stopped in, as we don't keep regular hours, but now and then someone stops by and finds us there, and we chat. There was no one out walking by the shop that hot summer day, so I cleared off the display table and set up my cutting board. The table had been my mother's kitchen table, longer when she kept 2 leaves in it to accommodate the house full present for Sunday dinners each week. It stands now without the leaves and accommodates a tabletop of items made by Rick only. But today it would hold scraps of materials, and later my sewing machine. I had no idea yet what the quilt was going to be, but there was no rush, no deadline. There were still 9 days of vacation left before the final weekend and schools reopening. I spread out some florals and solids, novelty prints, checks, plaids, all remnants. I found a piece of plaid from a worn shirt Rick had set aside, and I smiled as I thought about using it to build a block. I decided to build a house block. And I went into the house to find one of my quilter's books, one where I knew I would see some ideas for a house block. The short walk between the house and the barn was stifling, and when I returned to the work table, I decided I would make a winter house block, cool, refreshing. Winter is my favorite season. I used some leftover fabric from the snowman quilt I had made for my classroom. I found some scraps of the cardinal print and a fat quarter of night sky with stars, and I put it all together, and I made what I would call my house. In honor of the cardinals that we fed all winter, I made it like a birdhouse, with a round circular opening instead of a door and windows. I set up the machine and pieced the block together and took a picture of it. It looked cozy and safe. I emailed that picture then to my friend Paula, a true quilter who works solely by hand and makes beautiful heirlooms for her family and friends, and I asked her what she thought. She and her 2 young daughters gave me a thumbs up, and I promised to send them a picture of the next block the next day. And so I had begun my small email mentors and support. The next day I worked with some bright yellow fabric and a starry print left over from my grandson's lightning bolt quilt, and made what I would call my parents' house in the sky, where they and perhaps my brother were now enjoying heavenly tea together. I sent it off to the quilt mentors, and they again responded positively. The following day, the meat square also honored a couple, Kay and Kip, who fed the birds generously, and so they too had a birdhouse door. My sister and her husband had downsized, moving to a smaller home, transferring their larger home to their son and grandchildren, and now great-grandchildren. The pattern went quickly. The background was a piece of fabric with tiny birds and birdhouses on it, and I sent the photo to the girls and received their support and encouragement to keep going. I had some soft pink and floral fabrics left from the quilt I'd made for a woman in a nursing home, and so I chose those pieces for my sister Rosemary, who is a diligent end-of-life hospice nurse advocate. My son had once told us that she ought to have a pink house, and so she would in the quilt. The pink pastels and florals that later created Ro's house block had been given to the woman who was the mother of a nurse that Ro knew, and her daughter had known and cared for my parents, and her mother had become my mother-in-law's roommate, and it's a small world after all. Another day brought out the beautiful purple pansy and print that was requested by my mother-in-law's other roommate. A passion for purple she had, as does my sister Betty, so that house of purple pieces was designated as Betty's. The same blend of purple and pansies had also been used to make a quilt for Rick's Aunt Belinda in Florida, who is a crafty person herself. The Nemo print fabric had been used when I made a quilt for a teacher who was going in for hip surgery, and all of these other quilts that I mentioned are in the journal so that you can flip back and read about them. That quilt was made of envelope blocks with flaps that opened, and each fabric envelope held a get well card from my students. And since Pat is also a teacher and hosts the family gatherings at her pool for summer holidays, her house block features the water fabric and Nemo images. The next block used remnants from a humorous quilt, again made from my classroom wall, which is also over here on the left, featuring a print of comical bugs, some dressed as bookworms, others dressed as Omni ants. I had fussy cut the bugs from the background and placed them carefully in a shadow box log cabin arrangement, and I called it Bugs in Windows. The leafy background made a beautiful tropical background for my sister Mel's house block, who loves to cruise to tropical places, with a small pale print for a sandy footing that I know she would like. And that left 2 squares to go from my 2 brothers' homes. Bob had always hosted a large family gathering on Christmas night, so the gingerbread cookie fabric remnants seemed well suited as I pieced it together and remembered the Christmas that I had knit teddy bear and reindeer patterned sweaters for all the little boy cousins and all their little bears. Somewhere we have a picture of that group on the couch in Bob's living room on Christmas night. The cookie fabric had been from an infant quilt that I and my stitching circle girls after school had made to donate to the neonatal unit at a local hospital for the holidays. And then Jack, the youngest, had the very last block to be built. It was made of bright, vivid colors, as versatile and handsome as he is to this day. Its setting of bright green grass and promising blue sky suits the golfer in him and in his life. They find that healthy outlet wherever they live. Those fabrics were left from costumes that I'd made for school play, to dress players in shawls and ascots in the French town, as the French town folk in Beauty and the Beast. And that being the 9th block and the 9th day, the last day of summer vacation, I emailed my mentors and sent 2 more pictures, one of the squares against a sunny yellow background and one against a leafy green print. The girls chose the green, and I was happy with that, as it was a firm, solid footing for all of our houses to rest on, with only our parents' house separated from the ground, off in the heavens of that starry fabric that's still connected to each of our homes. I don't always have a plan for a quilt until I start. Like my stories, each quilt evolves in its own time and becomes its own story. This one has its charm now and then on the wall in my classroom, where an observant student will notice that the season's change has brought in a new quilt. I'll write more about the classroom quilts in a later chapter. So many quilts, so many stories. It is peaceful to sit in the window and share. And that quilt I'll hold up for you. I do want to share what I wrote on the back cover of this book, because I do quilt and I do write, and I see a lot in common between those two activities. Every quilt has its story. I've read that statement in many places, and I have added to it, and every story must have its writer. Quilting and writing go hand in hand. Both require equal measures of patience and creativity, though the skill sets for each are distinctly different. Both require practice. Quilters must learn to stitch evenly, and writers must learn to compose clearly. Quilters benefit from viewing others' quilts, and writers benefit from reading others' stories. There are no mistakes in quilting, I would say to my young students. There are always opportunities to unstitch and restitch. And there are no failures in writing, I would tell my students. There is always time to take a piece and make it even better. Both pursuits require and in time build the quality of patience and satisfaction in one's efforts. Quilts and writing each offer as much to the artist as to the audience. Every quilt has a story to be shared, and here you'll find some of mine. That's the book. This is the first book that I have incorporated color pictures in, and because I put colored pictures in this, and self-published it through Amazon's program called CreateSpace, the price was incredibly different. When I do a small book like this, which is quite small, with no pictures, the cost for this book for me might be $2.50, and then I get to sell it at a profit. When I write a longer book, like these two, the price with no pictures of these books might be $3.50 for me, and I get to sell it at a higher price. But because this had colored pictures in it, rather than $2 or $3, I had to pay $11 and some change to get this. And even I priced this at $15.99 in my shop. Amazon has priced this at $24 or $25. I think that's outrageous for a paperback book this thick. I wouldn't pay it. And if I sell it at $15 or $15.99, I'm making a few dollars on it, and that's good enough for me. I don't know why they price it in electronics. I can't connect those two prices. The others they let me price. This is the only one they told me the price for. They wouldn't let it be lower than 20 cents. So it has to do with the colored pictures. And so I will be very conservative in colored pictures that come up. So most of the quilts and the stories that are come are here in this book. So this book is really going to be a collector's book, because I'm not going to repeat all of them. I might put one or two in for a particular story and tie it into a quilt.
Terry, if you like cluster all the pictures in one section like you see books do sometimes, rather than putting it with the story, would that make it less costly?
I don't know. When I published this as an ebook on Amazon, some of the pictures didn't come through well with Kindle. Some of them are blacked out. So when I submitted to Smashwords, which is an online site which will e-format a book for any e-reader, Sony and Mobi, and I don't even know what they are, Nooks and Kindles. They're all different languages. And they'll put it through, they call it the meat grinder. And it spits out all of these different formats. I didn't put any pictures in it. I put the stories in it. And I had to do a little editing so it didn't say the quote above. I just describe the quilt a little bit. I didn't put any pictures in that, and it went through so that it could be sold at like $3 or $4.
Did you have a special paper that would make the colors look better and all that, or is it the same
It's
paper
all,
as the others?
the book is printed on the same paper as the
Yeah.
others. They will print it with a higher quality paper, and the price will go up. But
See,
they
I'm
will do that.
about to start mine, and
Yeah,
I need to have extremely good illustrations, so
Right.
I suspect mine is gonna come out very pricey.
but no. It's like a coffee table book, they're all
Yeah.
very pricey.
Yeah.
They're $50, $60, $70. 23, I was just astonished.
Yeah.
I can't imagine at 50 or 60 what that would be.
The posters behind you are beautiful.
Thank you, those are from Vistaprint, with whom I get free shipping because I order so much stuff from Vistaprint.
Did they mount them, or did you mount them?
No, they did.
They did.
And they are either blank-sided, or if you get a double-sided one, it's only $3 more. I think it's $3 to have a picture that's different than the others.
Yeah.
It's a pretty reasonable place to deal with. I want to show you this family quilt now that I have nicely set up the table. But that's all right. I just need these little piles so I can show you my family's houses. You know, Robbie was about 4 when he said Rosemary should live in a house. Here's my sister Kay. Kay has gone to heaven this year. She had 3 years ago. She had a kidney failure. And my brother Bob, he went to heaven 6 weeks before she did. He had cancer. It was a very hard time. And my brother Dickie has been in heaven with my father and mother since they died. But Dickie died when he was 28 in 1977. Two.
We were married 2 years.
We were married 2 years, so 73. Okay. We were married 2 years when Dick died. He died actually in a fire in Connecticut, which was devastating for my father. He was a fire chief in Boston. He was smoke inhalation. He was not a firefighter. He was a teenage counselor. This is my brother Jack, my handsome brother Jack. Look at those beautiful colors for Jack's house.
That's the baby of the family.
Baby of the family, yes. And these colors were all part of the ascots and the shawls for the French country people in East. This was from Tristan's lightning quilt, which you'll see it's a lot of cabinets arranged in a zigzag pattern. Betty loves purple, and so my mother-in-law's roommate, who also loved purple, had asked for a purple passion quilt, so Betty's remnants made up that quilt.
The blue must be Pat.
Pat is Nemo,
Yeah.
the swimming pool, yes, because she hosts us every July 4th, and she has a beautiful swimming pool in her backyard.
Is there one that's yours?
Yes, yes,
This is yours.
this is mine,
Well, that's yours.
because I love winter, and
Okay, with the
Trisha
winter and
lives
the
up
birds
in
and.
Maine, where it's always winter, and this is mud season. It's either winter or mud up there.
Or ice season as it is.
For August.
That's
August.
Or August.
Yes,
That's
snow and ice or mud, that's what you get.
I love the
You can
bird.
put that one, you can show that one yet in our quilt shows.
I haven't?
That's fine.
Well, I
Yeah,
should.
think so.
I love this because the back is flannel, and it's really nice to have in your lap. It's made as a lap quilt, and I prefer laps to walls for most of my quilts.
So this is the bottom left corner.
Bottom left is my brother Bob, who always hosted us on Christmas night,
It's cozy.
wherever he lived, except when he lived in New York City. We didn't go there. I was young then.
That's so neat.
Yeah, and I didn't have a plan. It was hot. I wanted it to be cool. I started with the first block, which is ours, and went from there.
I love the bird in that one. Is that a fussy cut little bird?
Yes, I had a piece of fabric that has cardinals on it,
Yeah.
so I cut them out, glued them on, and sewed them on.
Well, I assume that you might be willing to offer some books for sale in case some of us don't have all of them.
Well,
already.
I didn't bring all of my books. I will be talking about my poetry book at the Buttonwoods Museum in April. April is National Poetry Month. And I have two books of poetry. One is really basically about family, and a lot of them are the people that I've introduced to you through the quilt. I've written poems about them. And so if you want to hear about those, I'll be at Button Woods the first week.
You may be going to Danvers too, right?
Danvers in July, the New England Author Expo will be there. In May, I'll be back to Button Woods again. We're doing memoirs, and I'll talk about my love story memoir about MS. I mean, it's not a happy story, but it is a happy story because this man is in my life and has been forever. I mean, we became friends, best friends, when we were about 16. We were up at St. Mary's Church. He was in the back of the church selling newspapers, and I was downstairs taking care of little ones. It's a picture of who we are. And we became good friends, and we started dating when we were 17, and we became engaged when we were 18, and we were married at 20. We've been together a long time. We still have 15 years to go, I guess. Catch up with her and him.
It's wonderful. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.